For all of us in Maine, one of the more worrisome aspects of the changing climate is how it may affect our fishing industry. Meteorologist Ryan Breton analyzed data from the Gulf of Maine Research Institute showing that over the last 30 years, the average sea surface temperature in the Gulf of Maine has risen almost 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit. But the biggest part of that increase has been over the last 10 years. That's a factor that leads scientists to consider the Gulf one of the fastest warming areas of ocean anywhere. The ocean is different than it was. The Gulf of Maine is heating up, changing, and fishermen say they see it.
The way the lobsters act, where they're coming out, where they're congregating, you know, that's not the way it used to be.
Steve Train is a lobsterman on Casco Bay. He's been fishing near shore and offshore for decades and sees some of those changes right in his traps.
Just some of the species we're seeing we didn't see, you know, when I started in this business.
Like what?
Kids catching squid off the dock in Casco Bay. Black sea bass coming up in our traps 6 months a year.
All or most of it the result of ocean water warming up and luring some mid-Atlantic species farther north. You've been doing research on these waters for what, 30 years?
Yeah, about 30 years.
Do you see noticeable differences?
We've seen a ton of differences in the past 30 years.
Marine scientists like Dr. Rick Wallace at the University of Maine have been sounding a warning for years. He says the changing climate is now showing its effects, including on Maine's most important fishery, lobsters. As director of the Lobster Institute, Wallace says he's seeing more indications of lobster shell disease, a big problem in southern New England.
That's one of the things I really worry about is as things continue to warm, how is that going to affect the rate of shell disease, the prevalence of shell disease on our coast? And it's definitely taken a toll in southern New England.
He says lobsters are now covering a wider area of sea bottom, even small baby lobsters now being found offshore in deeper waters. Steve Train says he's seen it.
But there are still times that we'll see what we'd call a cricket, you know, the real small thumb-sized lobster that we used to see up inside in the mud sometimes. We'll see that in the trap, and that's after it came up through 50 or 60 fathom of water.
Warming water over the last 30 years did help create the boom in lobster catches, especially in down east Maine. But can it get too warm? Rick Wallace says some big things are changing down deep.
The Gulf Stream is having a much greater influence on our deep waters in the Gulf of Maine than it used to.
It is, the scientists say, a big change. The colder northern waters of the Labrador Current have always flowed down along Nova Scotia and then up into the Gulf of Maine and Bay of Fundy, helping to drive the circulation in our Gulf, bringing with them rich nutrients that have helped make the waters here as abundant as they are. But he says the warmer waters of the Gulf Stream are now pushing in, changing temperatures and food.
Those warm Gulf Stream waters are saltier, they're clearer, they have fewer nutrients in them, so they just don't fuel the productivity that the cold waters from the north were able to create.
And that shift may have far-reaching impacts. The warmer water is not good for tiny phytoplankton, including some called copepods. Researchers have found they are an essential food source for everything that eats them, everything.
It's a key food for everything from right whales to herring. And so maybe it's not too surprising that we also see it potentially being an important driver for lobster populations.
Maine fishermen are still catching a lot of lobsters. Steve Train says it's a credit to decades of good management by Maine's lobster industry.
And they did it to maintain the resource for future generations. You know, they weren't worried about this week's check or this year's check. They were worried about, is my kid or my neighbor or my neighbor's kid going to be able to go fishing, or am I going to ruin this fishery?
And for many, that is the worry today. Will a warmer Gulf of Maine still be home for a sustainable lobster fishery for generations to come? Rick Wally says some of it will, though the southern and mid-coast catches are likely to drop.
The relative favorability of the waters in the Gulf of Maine for lobster, it's the projections are that eastern Gulf of Maine and Fundy should remain relatively untouched.
For other species like shellfish, which are being used in aquaculture, there are still questions. Wally says they are hearing reports that kelp is being hurt by warmer water. Temperature changes over time, possibly changing so much. Do you worry?
I do. I'm glad I'm not 26 in this fishery, and you know, I'm a little bit beyond that, but I'm hoping that we can create buffers that'll offset the changing climate. You know, what they have to be yet, I don't know. But I'm hoping we can find a way to protect this resource despite a changing climate.
It's a hope shared by the entire coast.